another quiet June. Is rainbow capitalism finally dead? Happy Friday, Carnies, and welcome back to the Daily Carnage Show. I'm Shannon, I'm a digital marketing strategist at Carney, and I'm your host. And today we're talking about Pride Month, so grab your iced latte and let's get started. So for more than a decade, Pride Month has followed a pretty predictable corporate script. Every June, logos turned rainbow. Retailers rolled out their own Pride collections. Banks actually sponsored parades. I know that's hard to believe now. And basically all the major brands competed to show off their Pride Month credentials. But it's been clear for the last couple of years that corporate America is no longer moving in the same direction. Brands have really split into two camps on this. Some are metabolizing all the external political pressure and attacks on diversity initiatives and just quietly stepping back, while others are doubling down, arguing that retreating now would undermine years of their commitments to the LGBTQ plus community. Which is to say, brands are still participating, but I think that the rise of corporate pride that we saw in the 2010s is sort of effectively over as an era. And the backdrop to this really dramatic shift is, of course, the political environment surrounding DEI. Since 2024, dozens of major corporations have reassessed their diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, meaning everything from cutting back on sponsorship spending to doing away with cause and purpose-driven marketing altogether. Pride organizations across the US have reported sponsorship shortfalls as longtime corporate partners have either reduced their spending or just sort of ghosted altogether. We have organizers in all the major cities, San Francisco, DC, New York, Seattle, Toronto, and St. Louis, all reporting challenges in replacing those lost corporate dollars. What we have is major companies like Pepsi, MasterCard, Nissan, Citi, Adidas, Accenture, Home Depot, Google, all reducing their sponsorship commitments or shifting toward smaller employee-focused participation in Pride Month instead of these highly visible Pride campaigns. Of course, Target remains one of the more defining examples of this shift. They really became the focal point of a pretty intense controversy in 2023. There was sort of a coordinated conservative backlash against the Pride merchandise collection that Target debuted that year. And so they significantly reduced the visibility of their Pride displays and they limited merchandise placement, and they later rolled back a lot of their diversity-related initiatives. And when we talk about Target, we're talking about one of the most prominent Pride retail programs in America at that time. And it's now become far more restrained in the years since, and that aftershock has affected how corporations and brands approach Pride Month ever since. But why did Pride become a significant marketing platform in the first place? Let's talk a little bit about rainbow capitalism. This is the practice of brands aligning themselves with LGBTQ plus causes through marketing, sponsorship, merchandise, and these public statements. For more than a decade, we've seen brands kind of co-op LGBTQ plus symbols and branding and queer inclusive marketing as part of broader business strategies. The most obvious critique here is that brands often just reduced Pride to a marketing opportunity. So a logo refresh, a limited edition merch drop, and this would generate positive publicity. But notably, none of this required companies to address the more difficult issues such as workplace discrimination or healthcare access or housing insecurity or anti-LGBTQ plus legislation, things that employees of these brands were facing day in and day out. And this isn't just a corporate problem. As we know, marketing creates culture. And so when Pride Month becomes commercialized, it becomes a sales season rather than a social movement where we can actually get work done for the community. Another problem is that Pride Month, and particularly a lot of the merch around Pride Month, tends to sanitize LGBTQ plus history. It's important to remember that Pride began as a protest movement. It has its roots in resistance to discrimination and police harassment, most famously after the Stonewall riots. And naturally, when you round all of that up and process it through a fine corporate filter, it becomes retail displays and merchandise, and those political roots just become secondary to consumption. So where we ended up is really a Pride Month that does celebrate visibility while paying less attention to the structural issues that people in this community face still today. And notably, there have been plenty of instances where companies that outwardly promote inclusion maintain practices internally that are pretty inconsistent with that message. For instance, continuing to donate to politicians that support anti-LGBTQ plus policies. And there's a word for this. It's called pinkwashing. And it's the practice of using LGBTQ plus branding to improve your company image without making those meaningful changes behind the scenes. We also have to talk about representation in rainbow capitalism. If you've been alive for the last couple of decades, you're familiar with the standard image of Corporate Pride Month. It's a pretty narrow image. It's a commercially appealing image of queerness, typically young, affluent, cisgender, and white. And this is sort of the agreed upon PR-approved image. Notably not transgender people or people of color, other groups that are less marketable, but it should be said, in many cases, more vulnerable. But despite all of these very valid criticisms, it's true that visible corporate support helped normalize LGBTQ plus inclusion in mainstream culture. And it's also true that corporate pride campaigns helped fund community organizations, pride events, advocacy groups, local nonprofits. So now we're grappling with what happens when that funding dries up. And what is this corporate retreat signaling to and reflecting back from our current culture? The current data shows that between 48% and 57% of consumers say that Pride Month participation by brands remains important to them. Of course, among LGBTQ plus consumers, that number climbs dramatically up to 85%. And if we break it down by generation, the numbers are even more striking. Up to 75% of Gen Z say brand participation in Pride Month matters to them. Among millennials, that climbs up to even 78%. And consumers are becoming more selective about which brands deserve credit, who deserves the gold star. Does this company support the community all year round? Does it maintain inclusive workplace policies? Roughly 4 in 10 consumers agree that companies shouldn't participate in Pride if they're not supporting the community throughout the rest of the year. People don't want to see t-shirts, they want to see a portfolio of long-term commitment. And it's strange because all of the data seems to suggest that the consumer landscape remains supportive, but we're seeing a lot of brand executives behave as though participation in Pride is too risky. 2/3 of US adults are comfortable with brands participating in Pride Month. Americans especially are statistically more likely to respond positively or at least neutrally to Pride participation than they are negatively. And LGBTQ plus consumers continue to reward the brands that do show up. According to eMarketer, 80% of those consumers say a brand's celebration of Pride positively affects their perception of the company. And 3/4 of those consumers report purchasing products featuring Pride-related messaging or themes. The community is showing up for the campaigns that they identify as intentional and part of a broader strategy to support them. But undeniably, there have been a few instances over the last several years where brands became a political flashpoint. And now those reputational risks of participation, I think, are overemphasized. And so we're in this strange, quiet June, a silent spring, if you will, where brands are trying to find like a neutral middle ground. Some are not abandoning Pride entirely. They're changing how they participate. Maybe they're pulling back on headline sponsorships, but funding employee resource groups, which we love to see. MarTech described this as brands wanting to be, quote, in and out of the closet, essentially maintaining their commitments to LGBTQ plus folks while minimizing the public attention around that support. I don't know, it feels a lot like the 90s to me. But let's cleanse the palate and talk about some brands that haven't pulled back this year. Levi's in particular took an interesting approach by dropping a limited edition Pride collection inspired by queer biker culture. But more importantly, they backed that campaign with tangible financial commitments, donating $100,000 to Outright International and continuing to support organizations like the Trevor Project and the Human Rights Campaign. Levi's is also sponsoring Pride events in San Francisco, Amsterdam, Mexico City, Paris, Warsaw. Other companies maintaining visible support during Pride Month this year are companies like Elf Beauty, who have always had an inclusive youth-focused positioning. Abercrombie & Fitch is leaning into Pride-themed apparel and influencer marketing. Lush is continuing its long-standing activism and in-store advocacy. MAC Cosmetics frequently appears with LGBTQ creators and drag performers. Of course, Ben & Jerry's has always combined Pride messaging with political advocacy and nonprofit support. Diesel is running bold, queer-inclusive fashion campaigns centered on identity and self-expression. And The Body Shop has integrated Pride support into its broader human rights and ethical sourcing activism. All of these approaches differ, differ, but what they have in common is that they're showing up even when it's politically complicated to do so. And while a lot of other brands have pulled back because they perceive the stakes to be too high, a growing body of research suggests that retreating from cause marketing carries its own risks. Younger consumers increasingly evaluate companies through a lens of consistency. So brands that enthusiastically celebrated Pride during periods of cultural consensus about Pride, well, they lose a lot of credibility, especially with the youths when they become silent during periods of controversy. Some brands believe that authenticity means continuing internal support while reducing public visibility. And others believe that the only way forward is remaining visible precisely when visibility becomes more difficult. Whether you're a person or a brand, that is what really supporting a marginalized community looks like. One thing seems sure. As brands and executives are stressing out over these questions of what to do next, consumers are watching. There will come a day where it will again be fiscally responsible to support LGBTQ+ rights, to participate in Pride Month as a brand, as an organization. And whenever that day is, the internet or our robot overlords will remember who retreated. Or maybe you'll be able to pay ChatGPT to reject reality and substitute your own. Either way, if rainbow capitalism is truly dead, let it be replaced with financial and social advocacy. There are still organizations out there proving that you don't have to be quiet about it to make it through the darkness of the 2020s. Make sure to head over to our subreddit and let us know what your organization is doing for Pride Month, what they're not doing for Pride Month, what they do for LGBTQ+ people all year long, and what kinds of questions and conversations you're having with your peer group about this moment. And that wraps it up this week for the Daily Carnage. Thanks so much for joining me. Make sure to like and subscribe across all our socials. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the Daily Carnage, our daily newsletter. We send an email every day of the work week to keep you the sharpest marketer in the room. Have a good one, Carnies, and happy Pride Month. I will see you in the inbox.